29. Federal Election Commission by Hans A. von Spakovsky. Mission/Overview. The Federal Election Commission, FEC, is an independent federal agency that began operations in 1975 to enforce the Federal Election Campaign Act, FECA, passed by Congress in 1971 and amended in 1974. FECA governs the raising and spending of funds in all federal campaigns for Congress and the presidency. The FEC has no authority over the administration of federal elections, which is performed by state governments. While the FEC has exclusive civil enforcement authority over FECA, the U.S. Justice Department has criminal enforcement authority, which is defined as a knowing and willful violation of the law. The Justice Department doing things? What? Well, that just references 52 U.S.C. Section 3109C and D. I don't know what they're trying to say there. Perhaps I am reading this sentence incorrectly. The U.S. Justice Department has criminal enforcement authority, which is defined as a knowing and willful violation of the law. No, that still doesn't make sense. Criminal enforcement authority is defined as a knowing and willful violation of the law? Or they have enforcement over... Okay. We're gonna have to go read that one. Actually, let's do that now. I wasn't gonna distract myself this time because it takes longer to read it every time I get distracted, but you know what? If it's written badly, 52 U.S.C. Section 30109 C and D. Please hold while I look this up. U.S. Code 52 30109. Sections C and D. Oh, okay. So A is administrative and judicial practice and procedure. Scroll. The scrolls. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. B. Notice to persons not filing required reports prior to institution of enforcement action, blah, blah, blah. Reports by Attorney General of apparent violations. Whenever the Commission refers an apparent violation to the Attorney General shall report to the Commission any action taken by the Attorney General regarding the apparent violation. Each report shall be transmitted within 60 days after the date the Commission refers an apparent violation, and every 30 days thereafter until the final disposition of the apparent violation. Okay, the penalties, defenses, mitigations, and offenses is Section D. 1A. Any person who knowingly and willfully commits a violation of any provision of this Act. Okay, so their sentence was just badly worded. The DOJ can enforce things that are that. Because the FEC is an independent agency and not a division or office directly within the executive branch, the authority of the President over the actions of the FEC is extremely limited. As former FEC Commissioner Bradley Smith has said, the FEC's, quote, regulation of campaign finance deeply implicates First Amendment principles of free speech and association, end quote. The FEC regulates, in one of the most sensitive areas of the Bill of Rights, political speech and political activity by citizens, candidates, political parties, and the voluntary membership organizations that represent Americans who share common views on a huge range of important and vital public policy issues. Needed reforms. Nomination authority. The President's most significant power is the appointment of the 6 commissioners who govern the FEC, subject to confirmation by the U.S. Senate. Commissioners may only serve a single term of 6 years, but because they stay in office until a new commissioner has been confirmed, many commissioners continue to serve past their terms. Currently, the longest-serving commissioner still at the FEC is Alan Weintraub, a Democrat, whose regular term expired in 2007. Under FECA, no more than 3 commissioners may be from the same party. While that means that a commissioner could be an independent or a member of the Libertarian or Green parties, in practice, that has meant that the FEC has always had 3 Democrat and 3 Republican commissioners. There is a long-held political tradition since the FEC's founding that when a commission slot held by a member of the opposition political party opens up, the President consults with and nominates the chosen nominee of the opposition party's leader in the Senate. In exchange, the Senate party leader and his caucus agree to approve the President's nominee to fill an empty position for the President's political party. It has also been customary to advance the 2 nominees of the differing political parties at the same time. This bipartisan pairing has historically permitted easy confirmation of both parties' selectees. Thus, by convention, a Republican president will nominate a Republican and a Democrat for 2 open commission slots, including the choice of the Democrat Senate leader for his party seat. In turn, the senator will direct his party to vote to confirm both nominees. In the almost 50-year history of the FEC, this tradition has only been broken once, when Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid refused to approve one of George W. Bush's nominee, Hans von Spakovsky, for a Republican commission slot. I had a hard time reading that without chuckling because, if you'll remember from just briefly ago, Hans von Spakovsky is the person who is responsible for this section of Project 2025. I don't want to say that there's some butthurtness going on, but I don't not want to say that. The other thing I need to look up is I feel like Hans von Spakovsky's name came up in a book I just finished reading about the Voting Rights Act. It's called Give Us the Ballot by Ari Berman, and I don't remember, but I feel like Hans von Spakovsky was mentioned in that book as being against the Voting Rights Act, which would make sense coming from the Heritage Foundation, since the first mandate for leadership was quite long, but a chunk of it did deal with trying to get rid of the Voting Rights Act. This is why I think it's very important for people not to just be reading this as if it's in a vacuum. I've been encountering a lot of people on the internet who are saying, oh, I don't understand why you're blowing this so out of proportion. It's just this one fringe group, and there's no saying that Trump would do all of these things if he were elected, but these people are automatically showing how ignorant they are of the history of this group and the mandate for leadership in and of itself. Because, again, and I probably said this in my last commentary, I'm just going to keep saying it over and over again, they started with the first mandate for leadership in the first Reagan administration. They actually wrote this 3,000-page long thing before the Reagan administration came in, and then many of the people who worked on that project were appointed by the Reagan administration to various posts in the administration, and the mandate for leadership was required reading in the Reagan administration. And because I'm reading this in reverse, if you've already listened to the Onwards section, you will remember that the person who wrote that section was touting how well the Reagan administration did at accomplishing the goals in the mandate for leadership in just the first year of the administration alone, and how the Trump administration accomplished even more than the Reagan administration had in the first year alone. They like to brag that 60% of the mandate for leadership of 2016 was already accomplished by the Trump administration in the first year, which is why when people say that you're blowing this out of proportion, Trump doesn't know anything about it, it is complete and utter total bullshit. He may not know anything about it because he doesn't seem to pay attention to anything, but all of those people he appointed into the Trump administration were Heritage Foundation people and promptly got to work dismantling the agencies that they were heads of, which was a large part of what the Heritage Foundation is trying to do. I just found the subreddit today, Defeat Project 2025, and somebody posted a link to the Heritage Foundation where they had a list of all of the 2016 accomplishments or whatever. So there's a whole list of the accomplishments, and the other thing that I found is called The First Year, which is the Heritage Foundation's debriefing on how the Reagan administration had done throughout the first year. They go through all of the accomplishments the Reagan administration got done. So this is not a fringe group. This is a well-established, well-entrenched conservative think tank that has been working since Brown versus Board of Education, the Civil Rights Act, and the Voting Rights Act. And those are some of the main things that they were trying to get rid of when they started. They are actively trying to make it so that we don't have representatives, we have rulers. They have all of these things are trying to entrench power, although they will say a lot of things about how they're trying to make things more democratic, but a lot of the stuff in Project 2025 is actually giving more power to the president and less power to Congress. And that's not exactly what I would call furthering the goals of democracy. Okay, let's get back to this. Hans von Spakovsky. We'll not research him right now because I don't want to be up until 2 a.m. again, but we'll just make a mental note to check up on him later and see what his history is, because I want to say that I remembered reading about him with regards to the Voting Rights Act. Okay. In 2025, when a new president assumes office, the term of 5 of the current FEC commissioners will have either expired or be about to expire. Shanna B. Broussard, Democrat, whose term expired April 30th, 2023. Sean J. Cooksey, Republican, April 30th, 2021. I'm not entirely sure why their terms expire and they just stay on. Like, why don't... whatever. I don't understand the FEC very much, but what I do know is what often happens is it's just deadlocked and toothless because there are 6 commissioners, and because they have 3 and 3, they almost always vote along party lines. And so there was a lot of stuff in the 2020 election that was sketchy that didn't end up ever getting pushed up to the Department of Justice because they would deadlock. If they deadlock, they can't ever push things to the Department of Justice to be investigated. So it's basically just, like, I'd be curious to see what they're saying that they think the FEC should do, but if the argument is that it should continue to be 3 and 3, that seems like it would accomplish the goal of continuing to make it not useful. Like, I would argue that maybe there should be 7 commissioners. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure that this should be partisan appointees in the first place. I'm not sure how you would get around that. Again, I don't know a ton about the FEC, but I do know that it is the group that is supposed to go and say, hey, that person is doing illegal things in their campaign to be elected for this, that, or the other, like buying votes. That's the kind of thing that the FCC is supposed to be paying attention to and be like, hey, DOJ, you should probably look into this. It seems kind of like illegal. Alan Dickerson, Republican, April 30th, 2025. James Traynor, III, Republican, April 30th, 2023. Ellen L. Weintraub, Democrat, April 30th, 2007. During their terms, the 3 Republican commissioners have demonstrated with their votes and their public statements that they believe the FEC should not overregulate political activity and act beyond its statutory authority, construe ambiguous and confusing provisions against candidates and the public instead of the government, and infringe on protected First Amendment activities. The President assuming office in 2025 must ensure, if the 3 Republican commissioners do not wish to remain on the FEC past their terms, that nominees for these positions share the views of these commissioners. Also, to the extent that the President has the ability to negotiate with the Democratic Party leader in the Senate, he should try to temper any choice of the opposition party to ensure that this individual does not have extreme views on aggressive over-enforcement that would severely restrict political speech and protected party, campaign, and associated activities. I chuckle because, again, it seems like they want to just keep the deadlock. That seems beneficial to them. U.S. Department of Justice / FEC-related activities. The President does have control of the Department of Justice, DOJ. Thus, he has the authority as President, primarily through the choice of Attorney General and other political appointees, to direct the prosecutorial functions of the DOJ regarding criminal enforcement of FECA. Such investigations and prosecutions are carried out by the Public Integrity Section of the Criminal Division, with the assistance, coordination, and help of the offices of U.S. attorneys in whatever state an alleged violation occurs. The President must ensure that the DOJ, just like FEC, is directed to only prosecute clear violations of FECA. The Department must not construe ambiguous provisions against the public instead of the government, or apply FECA in a way that infringes on protected First Amendment activity. It should be, but is not always, obvious to overzealous government prosecutors that if a federal law is confusing, it would be unjust to prosecute individuals who are unable to determine if they have violated the law. The President should direct the DOJ and the Attorney General not to prosecute individuals under an interpretation of the law with which the FEC, the expert agency designated by Congress to enforce the law civilly and issue regulations establishing the standards under which the law is applied, does not agree. Again, what they are continuing to try to do with the FEC is make sure that it stays in a deadlock, which means that the FEC will never pass anything on to the DOJ, and they are basically saying that they don't want the DOJ to be instructed to say, well, yeah, but that is actually illegal, so we're going to go investigate even though the FEC didn't tell us to, which I think is convenient because from what I remember reading, much of the campaign of 2020, not much of it, there were several instances where they deadlocked on things that were pretty sketchy. In making prosecution decisions, DOJ should be instructed to consult and consider all official actions by the FEC that interpret the law, including prior enforcement actions, regulatory pronouncements, and advisory opinions, just as private practitioners, the public, and political actors must do. It is fundamentally unfair for the DOJ to prosecute an individual for supposedly violating the law when the FEC has previously determined that a similarly situated individual has not violated the law. This is so vague as to be useless. Like, yeah, obviously, but can you give me a concrete example of what you're talking about? Furthermore, this rule should apply even when there is a tied or 3-3 vote by the FEC commissioners, whether in an enforcement action or an advisory opinion, since under the statute, the FEC cannot take any action unless there are 4 affirmative votes. It's like I can read the future. This is so weasel wordy. Ooh, makes me... Ugh. Again, it seems obvious that if the commissioners designated by Congress to interpret the law are unable to determine what the law requires, then it is unfair to prosecute a citizen for violating that law. The DOJ should not engage in criminal prosecutions that stretch legal theories and defy FEC interpretations and regulations. Maybe if the FEC itself can't even figure out the law, they should recommend that Congress fix it, instead of just being like, I don't know how to read, so how am I supposed to enforce the law if I can't read? So hard. Another issue directly related to what has often been a contentious relationship between the FEC and the DOJ is the conduct of litigation. The vast majority of federal agencies are defended by the DOJ, which also represents them when the agency is pursuing litigation as a plaintiff. The FEC, however, is one of the few federal agencies with independent litigating authority. The FEC's lawyers represent the agency in federal court up through the federal courts of appeal. If a case reaches the U.S. Supreme Court, then the Office of the Solicitor General of the Department of Justice represents the FEC. In recent years, the FEC has failed to defend itself against litigation filed by political allies of certain Democratic commissioners. It takes 4 votes to authorize the General Counsel of the FEC to defend a lawsuit filed against the agency, and those commissioners have refused to provide that 4th vote. So, quote, the public was treated to the scandalous spectacle of the Commission, an independent agency of the United States government, defaulting in litigation before federal courts, end quote. So it's convenient when it deadlocks, except when it's inconvenient when it deadlocks. You can't have your cake and eat it too or something. I hate that phrase because it doesn't mean anything to me. Like, you can have your cake and eat it also. Like, what's the point of having cake if you... I digress. These cases involved enforcement matters in which the commissioners disagreed on whether a violation of the law had occurred. Sounds like they need a 7th. Accordingly, the final votes of the commissioners did not approve moving forward with enforcement because there were not 4 affirmative votes that a violation of the law occurred. When private plaintiffs then sued the FEC for failing to take action, Democrat commissioners refused to authorize the defense of the FEC in litigation as a way of circumventing the prior final action of the FEC and the FECA 4-vote requirement to authorize an enforcement action. Such defaults in litigation are unacceptable. Again, they're so vague that they're not telling you what case this is referring to, so I can't even... obviously there's like a thing down here that I can go look at later, but this is why... This is not something that you can just read at face value, because you need to go and fact check all of the things that they're talking about, because sure, it sounds fine to be like, well, the DOJ shouldn't prosecute if the agency that governs the thing doesn't say they should, but they're not giving any concrete examples, especially when we have concrete examples that show that a reasonable person looking at a situation could be like, that seems pretty illegal to me based on what you told me that the law says, and yet... because the person was a Republican, the 3 Republican commissioners voted to say not illegal actually, and they deadlocked. But then when somebody comes and says, hey, I don't think the FEC is doing its job, then they whine about the deadlock. So you can't have it both ways. But they're not being clear enough for you to be able to make that. You need the context of understanding that this is what the FEC does on a regular basis, and you also need to have the background of some of the things that the FEC has been going through because it deadlocks. And if they were just to pull out an example of somebody violating campaign finance or whatever, and the FEC deadlocking, and then being like, see, this is a good thing that they deadlocked because this is not a bad thing actually, and then they would have to eat their shoe or whatever because the thing that they're reading about is like, that clearly sounds illegal to me. Why would you be... Anyways. The President should direct the Attorney General to defend the FEC in all litigation when there is a failure of the Commissioners to authorize the General Counsel of the agency to defend it. So the President should tell the DOJ not to interfere unless the DOJ should interfere because the FEC both should be allowed to say things are not illegal when possibly they are because they deadlocked. But then when somebody else says, hey, I do think that's illegal actually, the DOJ should be able to come in and say, no, not illegal actually, which I guess is internally consistent, technically speaking. Like, what they're kind of saying is, if the FEC deadlocks and it can't go to the DOJ for investigation, then the DOJ should continue to be on the FEC's side and defend it at all costs. That's not inconsistent with what they're trying to go for, but it's odd that they want the DOJ to respect the FEC's decisions when they vote to say something is not illegal, but they don't want the DOJ to respect the FEC's decisions when the FEC votes to not defend itself against litigation. Like, I understand that the people voting to not defend themselves are the people who wanted to say the thing was illegal in the first place, but this is just a funny, like, what, anyways. The other thing that I think is important to note here is that they mentioned in the beginning that the FEC is an area where the president doesn't have a ton of control because they can't just they can't get rid of everybody up front and appoint whoever they want. So something that the Heritage Foundation really wants is for the president to be able to control more and more things. They want all of the appointees to be of the same thought process so that they can control all of the agencies and get everything that they want done in their project. And so really what this is saying is they like the deadlock that the FEC does because they can't get anything done. They can't prosecute things because they always deadlock on it. But they want the deadlock to be protected by the DOJ defending the deadlock, and that is supported by the fact that the president is the one that appoints the attorney general and therefore technically has influence over what the DOJ does. And so what they're really doing is trying to get control over the FEC by proxy. They want the president to keep right-wing people in the Republican positions of the FEC, and they also want the president to appoint a Democrat to the FEC who will be more likely to side with the Republicans. So they may as well say they want the president to appoint a fourth Republican, because not only do they want them to deadlock on things that they don't think should be prosecuted, but they also want them to be able to prosecute things that are conservative friendly. Anyways, the president should direct the attorney general to defend the FEC in all litigation where there is a failure of the commissioners to authorize the general counsel of the agency to defend it. No legislation would be necessary to accomplish this. The DOJ has the general authority to defend the government and its agencies in all litigation. As a legislative matter, and given this abuse, the president should seriously consider recommending that Congress amend FECA to remove the agency's independent litigating authority and rely on the Department of Justice to handle all litigation involving the FEC. So now what they're saying is they want it so that the FEC recommends that the DOJ prosecute things, and the DOJ will do that. And then anybody who tries to sue the FEC for not recommending litigation, that will also be handled by the DOJ. There are also multiple instances of existing statutory provisions of FECA and the accompanying FEC regulations having been found unlawful or unconstitutional by federal court decisions, yet those statutory provisions remain in the U.S. Code, and the implementing regulations remain in the Code of Federal Regulations. In such instances, those regulated by the law, from candidates to the public, have no way of knowing, without engaging in extensive legal research, whether particular statutory provisions and regulations are still applicable to their actions in the political arena. The President should request that the commissioners on the FEC prepare such guidance. In the event that the FEC fails to act, the President should direct the Attorney General to prepare a guidance document from the Department of Justice for the public that outlines all of the FEC statutory provisions and FEC regulations that have been changed, amended, or voided by specific court decisions. Legislative changes. While a president's ability to make any changes at an independent agency like the FEC is limited, the president has the ability to make legislative recommendations to Congress. One of the most obvious changes that is needed is to end the current practice of allowing commissioners to remain as serving commissioners long after their term has expired, defying the clear intent of Congress in specifying that a commissioner can only serve a single term of 6 years. That seems fine. I don't know what their ulterior motives are for this, but it is kind of weird to me that they say it's a 6-year term, and then they're like, that person's been here since 2007. Why, though? It's almost like it's a military term where they're like, well, you have to serve 6 years, but if you want to stay on, you're welcome to until you decide you don't want to be here anymore. Again, I'm not super knowledgeable about the FEC. I only remember reading a couple of those things that I mentioned previously. Also, every time I start reading, my stomach decides it's time to be like, hello, let me gurgle. So I have to hold a pillow in front of my stomach to try to muffle the noise of it trying to talk to you. The President should prioritize nominations to the FEC once commissioners reach the end of their terms and should be assisted by legislative language either eliminating or limiting overstays to a reasonable period of time to permit the vetting, nomination, and confirmation of successors. The President should vigorously oppose all efforts, as proposed, for example, in Section 6002 of the For the People Act of 2021, to change the structure of the FEC to reduce the number of commissioners from 6 to 5, or another odd number. Did I mention that it's like I can read the future? They like and want to keep the FEC in a deadlock. And so changing the number of commissioners to an odd number would inherently mean that they can never deadlock, which would actually make it better at its job. I mean, sure, that might mean that at some point you could have 3 Republican commissioners and 2 Democratic commissioners. Okay, at least they would be able to do something. I mean, I think it's good actually to prosecute criminal election behavior no matter who does it. So I guess the worst that happens if there are 3 conservatives and 2 non-conservatives in the FEC is they might try to prosecute things erroneously, but as long as the legal system holds up, the person who is prosecuted that way by the DOJ, hopefully that would be like the justice system should be able to iron that out. A judge and some juries or whatever would hopefully be like, this seems sketchy. The unfortunate part about that would mean that whoever is prosecuted has to go through the legal expense of the prosecution, but I am not a lawyer again, and I don't know exactly how you work that out, but I just think it's funny that I said all at the beginning that they deadlock all the time, and it'd be great if they had an odd number, and now they're like, no, we don't like that. No, thank you. The current requirement of 4 votes to authorize an enforcement action, provide an advisory opinion, or issue regulations ensures that there is bipartisan agreement before any action is taken and protects against the FEC being used as a political weapon. I mean, yeah, but also right now it is being used as a reverse political weapon because the 3 Republican commissioners are the ones voting against prosecuting crimes. So this is so weasel worded. With only 5 commissioners, 3 members of the same political party could control the enforcement process of the agency, raising the potential of a powerful federal agency enforcing the law on a partisan basis against the members of the opposition political party. Efforts to impose a nonpartisan, or so-called independent, chair are impractical. The chair will inevitably be aligned with his or her appointing party, at least as a matter of perception. There are numerous other changes that should be considered in FECA and the FEC's regulations. The overly restrictive limits on the ability of party committees to coordinate with their candidates, for example, violates associational rights and unjustifiably interferes with the very purpose of political parties, to elect their candidates. I don't remember the full details of this, but this was one of the things that I remember coming by the FEC. Like, the problem is coordinating behind the scenes. I think somebody was doing some weird money things. I'm gonna have to go and read some analysis on this. Raise contribution limits. Good grief, you guys. Say the quiet part louder, will you? Raise contribution limits and index reporting requirements to inflation. Contribution limits should generally be much higher, as they hamstring candidates and parties while serving no practical anti-corruption purpose. Let me read that to you again. Contribution limits should be higher because they serve no practical anti-corruption purpose. You can't see it because I'm not videoing this, but my eyebrow is real high up there on my forehead right now. And a wide range of reporting requirements have not been indexed to inflation, clogging the public record and the FEC's internal processes with small dollar information of little use to the public. Conclusion. When taking any action related to the FEC, the President should keep in mind that, as former FEC Chairman Bradley Smith says, quote, "The greater problem at the FEC has been over-enforcement," end quote, not under-enforcement, as some critics falsely allege. How dare you call me a liar, sir? As he correctly concludes, the FEC's enforcement efforts, quote, "place a substantial burden on small committees and campaigns and are having a chilling effect on some political speech, squeezing the life out of low-level, volunteer political activity," end quote. Commissioners have a duty to enforce FECA in a fair, nonpartisan, objective manner, but they must do so in a way that protects the First Amendment rights of the public, political parties, and candidates to fully participate in the political process. The President has the same duty to ensure that the Department of Justice enforces the law in a similar manner. The end. Okay, I'm gonna, because I can't stand not remembering what those things that they were deadlocking on, I'm gonna look it up. I chuckled because the thing that I just found, the New York Times article that says, "A Democrat, siding with the GOP, is removing limits on political cash at breathtaking speed." This is from June 10th of this year, 2024. Let's copy this link, go to archive.org because I don't have a New York Times account, paste this link into the Wayback Machine, hit enter, wait for it to load, continue waiting for it to load, get a "no server is available to handle this request" response. Come on, guys. This is important. Too many people be using Internet Archive trying to look up Project 2025 right now. Stop it, I have more important business. Please load? No. Okay, fine, we won't go to the New York Times. We'll read somebody else. Oh, that's fun. Next on the list of things. Okay, so the next two articles that I just found, one of which is on the fec.gov website, is titled "Dysfunction and Deadlock." Right on their website. That should be fun. Okay, Federal Election Commission deadlocks won't punish Trump. This is from May 16th, 2022. The claim was that the campaign was breaking the law by masking how it was spending cash during the 2020 election campaign. The complaint was that he was laundering hundreds of millions of dollars in spending from mandatory public disclosure by routing payments through companies that were tied to his former campaign manager, Brad Parscale. The practice has long been considered against the law, but in recent years the FEC, which is evenly split between Democrats and Republicans, has frequently deadlocked on major decisions such as this one. In a similar case in March, the FEC found probable cause that Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign and the Democratic National Committee had violated campaign law by misreporting spending on research that eventually became the infamous Steele dossier. In that case, the DNC agreed to pay $113,000 to settle without conceding that they violated the law. But the FEC actually found probable cause for that. So this is the other thing that I'm kind of interested in, is there's always the both sides argument, both parties are bad. But while I will agree that democracy is frustrating, that is an equivocation that is not based in reality. My favorite analogy is to say that one of these teams, quote unquote teams, I don't like thinking about politics in teams, but when you go to the lengths of calling yourself a Republican or a Democrat, which personally I do not ascribe a party label to myself because I was raised by people who call themselves Republicans and they are now so deeply into it and it's so a part of their personality that anything that is criticized in the Republican Party feels like it's a personal attack against them because they, quote unquote, are good people and are Republicans, and therefore a Republican would never do that. So it's either not true or that person is not actually a Republican, which is where the idea of a rhino, a Republican in name only, comes from. So I don't like using a label of a party to call myself a Democrat or a Republican. I never want to get into the situation where I am so tied to a political party as my identity that I cannot see that they are pulling the wrong direction. If the Democratic Party decided to do a Southern strategy all of a sudden and be like, white people actually are the best thing ever, I'm not going with them. I don't care how many times in the past I have voted along their party lines, which has been a lot because my values tend to be in the same areas that they tend to be pushing towards. But I am not a Democrat, because I will wash my hands of any party the moment that it starts doing fasci or other authoritarian things. Anyways, back to the equivocation portion of it. People try to say that there's an equivalence, but the fact that the FEC actually did find probable cause and prosecuted that implies to me that the Democratic commissioners are acting in more good faith than the Republican commissioners are. Granted, I would have to know more about what they were looking into with the Trump campaign things, but that seems convenient, don't it? Okay, so the AP says, during the 2020 campaign, most of the payments by Trump's campaign committees were made to America-made media consultants, which has received at least $780 million between 2018 and 2021, according to the FEC records. The other firm, Parscale Strategy, collected at least $32 million during that period. The campaign said that the American-made media consultants was performed to purchase advertising directly and save money by not relying on a go-between, but the company instead acted as a clearinghouse for spending while still using third-party vendors, which it ostensibly created to avoid, the complaint states. In at least 2 cases, outside firms owned by Trump's digital director Gary Kobe, appeared to have been the firm tapped to make purchases or develop digital communications products, though there is no record of payments made to Kobe in Trump's campaign finance disclosures, according to the complaint. So it sounds like what the complaint was alleging is that they're laundering money and giving it to people that they like to do the campaign outreach. Meanwhile, Parscale Strategy was used to pay the salaries of some Trump re-election officials, including Lara Trump, the wife of Trump's son Eric, and Kimberly Guilfoyle, the fiancée of Trump's eldest son, Don Jr., the complaint stated. Oh, the nepotism. 2021 FEC article in the New York Times. Democrats' improbable new FEC strategy. More deadlock than ever. This sounds like it was written by Hans von Spakovsky. What a name, by the way. Okay, let's look at what the FEC.gov thing says about its deadlock. Okay, this was written by Commissioner Ann M. Ravel in 2017. Let's go back to the mandate for leadership and see if her name was on one of these people who've been there for a while. No, she is no longer on the FEC, or if she is, she's not expiring soon. Ann M. Ravel. So the next thing I want to know is, what is her party affiliation, or who appointed her? Ann M. Ravel. This may seem like I'm trying to discredit somebody's background by saying, oh, well, she's a Republican, so we can't trust her, or she's a Democrat, we can't trust her. But I think it's important to know someone's biases before reading what they are saying. It's just important to know who's talking. You shouldn't take things out of context. Okay, so Ann Miller Ravel is an American attorney who was a Democratic commissioner of the Federal Election Commission. So she was a Democratic commissioner appointed by Barack Obama. So this is called Dysfunction and Deadlock. The enforcement crisis at the Federal Election Commission reveals the unlikelihood of draining the swamp. I like that she did that. That's fun. Sort of throwing a bone to the people who want to drain the swamp. So let's just read the executive summary real quick, and that hopefully should give us a good enough overview. The Federal Election Commission is an independent regulatory agency established to enforce and administer federal campaign finance laws. Over the past 10 years, as the results of this new study lay bare, the effectiveness of the FEC has deteriorated. It appears that these trends could accelerate in 2017, so it is important for the public to know about its failures. I feel like it's important to note that it appears that these trends could accelerate in 2017 is basically saying the Trump administration is going to mess with the FEC, so it's important for the public to know about the failures. While the FEC's employees strive to fulfill its mission, the commission itself, made up of 6 commissioners, is not performing its duty. A block of 3 commissioners routinely thwarts, obstructs, and delays action on the very campaign finance laws its members were appointed to administer. This block voted to lockstep 98% of the time, according to a recent news analysis of cases closed since 2015. Due to the bloc's ideological opposition to campaign finance law, major violations are swept under the rug, and the resulting dark money has left Americans uninformed about the sources of campaign spending. The Commission's work is essential to the integrity and fairness of the political process and to ensure public trust in government. As the FEC explains on its website, campaign finance law seeks to, quote, limit the disproportionate influence of wealthy individuals and special interest groups in the outcome of federal elections, regulate spending in campaigns for federal office, and deter abuses by mandating public disclosure of campaign finances. We like disclosure and transparency. There's a sidebar bubble over here that says, statistics about deadlocked 3-3 votes do not tell the whole story. For nearly every case of major significance over the past several years, the Commission has deadlocked on investigating serious allegations or has failed to hold violators fully accountable. This report highlights some of the most recent examples of deadlock and dysfunction. This incredibly significant commission is not performing the job that Congress intended, and violators of the law are given a free pass. Because of this, candidates and committees are aware that they can ignore the laws enacted to protect the integrity of our elections. This report exposes, among other things, how the Commission and some of its members have dramatically increased the number of deadlocked substantive votes from 2006 to 2016. The bloc has used the 4-vote requirement to take most action as unchecked veto power to delay and dismiss flagrant violations, impose significantly lower penalties, and leave major cases without resolution. In 2006, commissioners deadlocked in just 2.9% of substantive cases in matters under review. MURs, also known as enforcement cases, closed that year. For MURs closed in 2016, the commissioners deadlocked on 30% of all substantive votes taken in those matters. In 2006, only 4.2% of MURs closed had at least one deadlocked vote. However, in 2016, 37.5% of all MURs closed had at least one deadlocked vote. Second, it dramatically reduced fines over the past decade. In 2006, the Commission assessed more than $5.5 million in MUR civil monetary penalties. The 2016 MUR civil penalties imposed totaled only $595,425. By comparison, this is significantly less than the nearly $900,000 that California's Fair Political Practices Commission, an agency for one state, assessed in 2016. That is pretty impressive. It failed to enact new regulations post-Citizens United concerning secret campaign spending. In Citizens United, the Supreme Court approved disclosure so that voters can be informed about who is behind political campaigns. Since the court's decision in 2010, more than $800 million in federal campaign spending has come from undisclosed sources. Yet the bloc has prevented any enactment of rules to ensure that all campaign spending is disclosed. It also ideologically opposed the agency's purpose. This is referring to the bloc, by the way, not the FEC, but the bloc of people who are constantly deadlocking. Commissioner Goodman told the New York Times that, quote, Congress set this place up to gridlock. This agency is functioning as Congress intended. The democracy isn't collapsing around us, end quote. White House counsel Don McGahn, a former commissioner himself, said during his FEC tenure that he would, quote, plead guilty as charged, end quote, to, quote, not enforcing the law as Congress passed it, end quote. It blocked investigations of serious campaign finance violations by changing the standard of proof. When a complaint is filed and the alleged violator responds, if there are indications that a violation of the law may have occurred, the Commission is supposed to investigate to gather additional facts to determine if there was, or was not, wrongdoing in important cases. The bloc of commissioners, however, has blocked even a preliminary investigation. Consequently, major violators are routinely let off the hook at this early stage. This report also highlights 18 illustrative enforcement complaints that have come before the Commission recently, in which the agency failed to require meaningful accountability from individuals, corporations, labor unions, and dark money groups. These cases are not an exhaustive list, but show the serious consequences of gridlock, including lack of disclosure and political committee registration, employer coercion, candidates' personal use of campaign funds, and foreign national contributions. Although many of these cases captured public attention, in none did the Commissioner hold wrongdoers accountable for the full extent of their misconduct. These matters include employee coercion, Robert E. Murray and Murray Energy Corp., MURs 6661 and 6651. In October 2012, a complaint alleged that Murray Energy and its CEO coerced employees, including by threats of being fired, to pressure them to contribute to Governor Mitt Romney's presidential campaign. What the actual fuck? Although the Nonpartisan Office of General Counsel, OGC, recommended that there was reason to believe that this violated the law and that the commission should authorize an investigation, the 3 commissioners in the anti-enforcement bloc voted to do nothing. Similar allegations against the same company in another case were also not investigated. See, they want it like this. They want it to deadlock so that and they use this language that they're like, oh, we're just trying to protect the First Amendment rights of people. Like the First Amendment rights of a CEO to threaten to fire their employees if they don't give money to Mitt Romney's presidential campaign. Not entirely sure how that's protecting people's freedom. Second, pass-throughs to keep contributors' identities secret. The LLC cases. MURs 6485, 6487, 6488, 6711, and 6930. 5 separate complaints alleged that several limited liability companies, LLCs, contributed to super PACs supporting a presidential candidate in order to hide the true identity of the contributor. The complaints alleged that the LLCs were created as a pass-through for millions of dollars in contributions from individuals who wished to keep their identities secret. One contributor openly admitted that he gave to his newly formed LLC for the sole purpose of hiding his identity and evading disclosure. OGC recommended that the commission find reason to believe the LLCs had violated the law in all but one of the matters. As several cases were pending for 4 years, 3 commissioners made more than 10 motions to open investigation. The anti-enforcement bloc of commissioners abstained or voted against the OGC's recommendations, preventing disclosure of the source of the money. Failure of social welfare organizations to register as political committees and disclose. Commission on Hope, Growth, and Opportunity, CHGO. This is MURs 6391 and 6471. A complaint alleged that CHGO, a 501c4 social welfare organization, failed to report and include required disclaimers on more than $2 million of advertisements. OGC recommended that the Commission find reason to believe that CHGO violated the law by failing to disclose spending on the ads and omitting the proper disclaimers. OGC also recommended finding reason to believe that CHGO should have registered as a political committee, which would have required it to inform the public about how it raises and spends money to influence elections. The Commission deadlocked on some of OGC's recommendations, but authorized a limited investigation. The investigation found voluminous evidence that CHGO's major purpose was to influence federal elections and that 85% of the money it spent on 2010, $4.77 million, funded political advertisements. The anti-enforcement bloc of commissioners refused to find a violation and refused to enter into settlement negotiations with CHGO. Nothing was done about this clear violation. There is then a graph that says all substantive votes in enforcement matters, MURs, closed per year, the percentage that deadlocked is increasing. And it shows that the percentage that deadlocked in 2006, as she mentioned, was down around 4%, and then in 2016 was 30%. And there's another graph, and then the total civil penalties graph, which went from 6 million-ish in 2006 down to less than 1 million. Okay, that's the end of the executive summary. So I feel like this is, if you're being a logical thinking person, this seems pretty clear-cut that the FEC is not able to do its job. The other thing that I need to do, though, is see if that archive.org page that I wanted to load for the New York Times article would actually load, because I'm curious about this Democrat siding with the FEC GOP to remove limits on political spending. That is interesting to me, and I want to know which commissioner that is now. Archive.org. Okay, so we have Wayback Machine, paste, please work. The problem with using internet sites, see, they're doing some maintenance on the server. Okay, well, that's probably fine. I probably shouldn't stay up super, super late anyways. Hopefully that gave a high-level overview of the FEC and how it's been working, which should give you more context into that little snippet made by Hans von Spakovsky, which, since I can't open that other thing, let's look up Hans von Spakovsky. What a name, though, right? Hans Anatol von Spakovsky, born March 11th, 1959, is an American attorney and a former member of the Federal Election Commission. He is the manager of the Heritage Foundation's Election Law Reform Initiative and a senior legal fellow in the Heritage Foundation's Meese Center for Legal and Judicial Studies. He is an advocate for stricter voting laws. Of course he is. He has been described as playing an influential role in making concern about voter fraud mainstream in the Republican Party. Cool. Thanks. I hate it. The Democrats opposed his nomination because they argued his oversight of voter laws was unacceptably partisan. It was bolstered by objections from career Justice Department staff who accused von Spakovsky of politicizing his nominally nonpartisan office to an unprecedented degree. The Bush administration withdrew the nomination. He served as the Republican Party chairman in Fulton County, Georgia. This is interesting because this is... So, again, I don't remember if I mentioned this or if I just think it constantly, and I think that I've said it out loud, but the Heritage Foundation's first mandate for leadership, again, came about right around the same time that the Southern strategy was happening, where because the Democratic Party had started embracing more civil rights measures, specifically the Johnson administration, he signed the Civil Rights Act into law, and a bunch of Democrats freaked the fuck out and joined the Republican Party. And because more and more African Americans and minority people were joining the Democratic Party and voting, they were pushing the Democratic Party towards more progressive and a more multiracial democracy direction, which a lot of racist white folks did not like. So the fact that von Spakovsky served as the Republican Party chairman in Fulton County, Georgia, makes me think things. He became a member of Voting Integrity Project, which alleged voter fraud across the United States, as well as a member of the political conservative Federalist Society. Yeah, that checks out. Ooh, controversies. Okay, we like this. He sent an email arguing against the appointment of Democrats and, quote, mainstream Republicans to the Trump administration's Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity. So he wanted far-right folks. He was hired by the Justice Department as an expert on elections. He advocated for what he described as the application of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 in a race-neutral manner. He was also tasked with guiding the Bush administration's role in passing legislation that became known as the Help America Vote Act. His tenure at the Justice Department was marked by a focus on voter eligibility and voter fraud. In 2005, he led the department's approval of a controversial Georgia law requiring voters to produce photo ID, despite strong objections from Justice Department staff that the law would disproportionately harm and disenfranchise African American voters. Von Spakovsky subsequently acknowledged that he had written a law review article supporting such photo ID laws under the pseudonym Publius, prompting concerns that he should have recused himself from the Justice Department decision. A portion of the law was subsequently overturned. However, the voter ID portion of the law was approved and was in effect for the 2008 election. During von Spakovsky's tenure, more than half of the career Justice Department staff left the voting section in protest. He argued against the reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act in 2006. Yeah, so this does make me think that this is why I remembered his name, because he did have a lot to do with Voting Rights Act stuff, and therefore was almost certainly the person I was thinking of who was mentioned in Ari Berman's book, Give Us the Ballot. He argued against the reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act in 2006, but the reauthorization overwhelmingly passed Congress and was signed into law by the Bush administration. He also served on the Board of Advisors of the Election Admission Assistance Commission. He clashed with the commission head. Several individuals with knowledge of the situation alleged that De Gregorio, the head of that, had resisted an overtly partisan agenda, and his removal was therefore engineered by von Spakovsky. He's also made false claims about voter fraud. He's promoted the myth that Democratic voter fraud is common and that it helps Democrats win elections. He supported his claims about the extent of voter fraud by citing a 2000 investigation by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which purported to find 5,400 instances of deceased people in Georgia voting in the last decade. The Journal-Constitution later revised its finding, noting that it had no evidence of a single deceased person voting and that the vast majority of the instances were due to clerical errors. In an interview, he cited two scholars he said could substantiate the voter impersonation fraud was a significant threat. He also claimed that a guy named Pastor had personally experienced voter fraud by impersonation, but Pastor himself refuted the claim, saying, quote, "I think they just mistakenly checked my name when my son voted. It was just a mistake. I don't think that voter impersonation fraud is a serious problem." Pastor and Sabato, who were other scholars, said that they would only support voter ID laws if voter IDs were made free and easily accessible to all. This is something that I also am fine with. Like, the problem with, if I remember correctly, this may have been the one where Ari Berman was talking about the reason that it was considered a poll tax was because in order to get a voter ID, it's not, there is a straw man argument that you will hear the right, quote unquote, the right, say that Democrats who argue that photo ID laws disproportionately affect African Americans are saying that they think that African Americans are not smart enough to go and get themselves an ID. And this shows your ignorance again. If you are making this argument, it means you don't know anything about that particular situation and how difficult they also make it to get a photo ID, right? So it is not just as simple as going over and saying, hey, can I have a photo ID, and them giving it to you. What has also happened is things like strategically closing the motor vehicles department in a place that is heavily Democratic or heavily African American. So not only are you required to have a photo ID to vote, you now have to drive an hour away to the nearest Department of Motor Vehicles office to go get yourself a photo ID, which is effectively a poll tax because you have to take time out of your day to go and do that. And most of the time, the Department of Motor Vehicles is only open during business hours, and the people that they target with these things tend to be poorer. So you can't afford to take time off of work to go to the Department of Motor Vehicles to get yourself a photo ID to vote. A lot of times it's also expensive to go do that, and time is money, so not only do you have to take the time, but because your time is money, that is money right there. But you have to spend money on gas to go get your photo ID. You have to go, maybe you don't have a car, and there's bad public transportation, so it just puts all of these roadblocks in front of people to be able to vote. So if you want to make a voter ID, photo ID law, you have to also make it incredibly easy to get it. It can't cost any money, because if it costs money, that's a poll tax. It can't cost any time, because if it costs time, time is money, and money is a poll tax. So it's fine if you want a voter ID voter ID law, but you can't do that while also saying, well, we also made it so that the only DMV that you can go get your photo ID from is on the complete opposite side of the state and is only open during the hours of 10 and 11:30 on the third Tuesday during the full moon, the strawberry moon specifically. Like that is effectively voter suppression and disenfranchisement. That is obviously a off-the-walls bonkers example, which doesn't exist, but reality is that they have been closing DMVs in areas where they don't want those people to be able to vote, and then passing voter ID laws and making it so that not only is it hard to get an ID, but you need that ID to vote. And you can't afford the time to do that, so you can't vote. The other people that this ends up harming, which is kind of in the category of leopards ate my face, if you don't understand the reference, this is usually referring to a person who sided with a certain group, thinking against their best interest, thinking, well, they won't do it to me. And then when it comes back on them, they're like, I don't understand what happened. Why did the leopards eat my face? I thought we were friends. So with the voter ID laws, the people this also ends up hurting happen to be older people or people who are disabled. And with the older people thing, that does disproportionately harm conservatives. Not all older people are conservatives, but in the states that this is happening to, many of the people who are older tend to be Republican voters. Ari Berman mentioned a couple of cases that I thought were really well placed, where he would bring up somebody like a legislator who was totally in favor of these voter ID laws and then changed their minds, because one of the examples I remember the most was this man was trying to help his 90-year-old mother vote. And he was like, well, she's really old, so she can't get a driver's license anymore because she won't pass the test. She's too old, she can't see, she's not very mobile, whatever. So for whatever reason, she can't get a driver's license. She doesn't own a gun, so she doesn't have a gun license, which oftentimes is another thing that they count as a legal form of ID. The other problem with this is that it's not necessary. Like, this is a whole red herring argument in the first place, because this kind of voter fraud, like people impersonating somebody else and you needing to verify that they are who they say they are with a picture of themselves on a government-issued ID, is just such a small problem as to be not worth mentioning at all. Most of the things that Republicans are currently complaining about with regards to election insecurity, in quotation marks, are not things. Like, there are not millions of illegal immigrants voting, and the election systems in all of the states are very robust and good at catching instances if and when a non-citizen votes. They are almost always caught and not counted in the voting tally in the end. On top of that, it's so rare that even if it does happen, it's so small as to not matter as far as the election goes. Like, most elections are not decided on a one vote thing, but in elections where the margin does get that small, that is when they do start doing those more rigorous analyses. So many of the things that Republicans are complaining about with regards to quote-unquote voting integrity is an ignorance of the incredible security and integrity that our system across the states actually has. I cannot recommend this book highly enough, but The Big Truth. It's by Major Garrett and David Becker. Major Garrett is a journalist, and I think he may have been involved in some political stuff. David Becker is a lawyer specifically focused on elections. I think at some point he was in the Department of Justice, and now he is focused on supporting election workers and protecting them, especially legally. So they wrote this book kindly debunking the disinformation and misinformation about the 2020 election. And I say kindly because I have actually been trying to find a book that I feel like somebody who is a Republican or is worried about elections could actually read and not have their thinking turned off by certain trigger words. It's language that, upon hearing it, a partisan-minded person immediately thinks, ugh, this is biased. I'm not going to believe a single word this person says. Whether that's fair or not can be argued, but I do think it's important that if you're going to write an informative book, especially something that is debunking something that someone else is being lied to about, it needs to be written in language that is not going to turn them off. And The Big Truth really does that, I think, very well. In fact, not only do they go out of their way to departisan as much of their language as possible, they do say, we are not going to, like, us saying that Trump acted badly in the election is not partisan. It is the truth. And we're not going to sugarcoat that. But they also don't make fun of Republicans for believing it. They also acknowledge that a lot of Republicans feel like Trump was given a bad rap in 2016. Whether or not you think that is accurate, they acknowledge that that is how they feel and that they are angry about that. But they also started the book with some hypothetical situations that I think were very well crafted, because they said, here are a bunch of ways that a couple of elections, I think they used the 2020 election, the 2016 election. They used the 2016 election, the 2020 election, and then a possible future 2022 or 2024 election. But instead of making it, what if Republicans went a step further, they said, what if Democrats had done this, that, and the other? And I think that was a very good idea on their part, because it is very easy for a very partisan person to poo-poo wrongdoing on the behalf of their party because it's their team doing it and they're doing it for the greater good, or whatever reasoning you use to okay it in your mind because it's quote-unquote your team doing it. It makes it a lot harder for you to see the wrongdoing in it. And so if you change all of the names and you say whatever it was, like they basically took the things that the Trump administration and Trump himself did in 2020 and said, what if Biden does this in 2024? Or what if Obama had done this in 2016? And they lay out exactly the timeline of all of these things that happened. And then they're like, this didn't happen. It couldn't have happened because people abided by the judicial process and did their legal right of challenging things. And then when the challenges failed, they said, okay, we're done. We're going to stop. And so they basically say, if you think that's scary, the Trump administration and what the Trump team did was so much worse. And now we're going to tell you all about how that is. So if you have any people who might be a little bit open-minded, I would recommend that book very highly. Yeah, so that I don't think we need to keep going into Hans von Spakovsky, but suffice to say, he promotes election disinformation, at least, if not malinformation. He wants to restrict voting. He grew up in an era where the Republican Party was actually the party of anti-civil rights, and he was a member of that, so I find him sus. Which should not be saying anything. I mean, he's working for the Heritage Foundation. I find most of the people who are working for the Heritage Foundation sus. Okay, I would try to read another section of that, but I think I'm going to go hoarse if I do, so it is bedtime. Do let me know if you appreciate or have any comments with regards to my commentary. I am releasing this both in the included commentary and not included commentary format because I find it distracting to try to grok a thing when people are commenting on it every couple sentences. Like, I lose the thread and I think it's distracting. So in the event you just want to listen to Project 2025, that's why I have edited out my commentary. But for those of you who are interested in my rambling about politics, here you go. Okay, it's bedtime.